Hey guys, welcome to Readings from Gift of the Shaper. I'm your host, DL Jennings. So today we're going to be doing chapter 12, which takes place in the Talvin Forest outside of Lusk. And this is actually going to be the first chapter that deals with Mira's POV. Despite Kethras's protests, Thornton lit the torch he had brought, insisting he use it to follow the tracks. Kethras was worried about giving themselves away. An open invitation to predators and thieves, he'd called it, and the two had argued back and forth until Inara had finally spoke up in favor of Thornton, citing a chance to sharpen his awful tracking skills, as she put it. Thornton had grumbled a thank you to her. Kethras glanced at her skeptically and then turned to the woods. Very well, I will find food, he said as he walked off. Without turning around, he added, Don't worry, I will find you again. Mira watched him go, but quickly lost sight of him. She turned back to Inara, who was a few steps behind Thornton. How long have you known Kethras? She asked. Inara looked at her with a smile. Long enough to know that he is still the same Kethras, she said. You can ask our mother when you meet her. She delights in stories and memories. What is she like, your mother? Mira asked. The two of them were walking a good distance behind Thornton, who was slowly but surely keeping up with the tracks. Inara thought for a moment in silence. She bears a great burden, one that has worn on her for some time. But despite this, she's full of love. You cannot find a more compassionate being in this world, perhaps even in the other world. And she is beautiful. She sounds very much like someone I would like to meet, Mira answered. She's looking forward to seeing you again as well, Inara smiled. Mira smiled, then blinked in confusion. Before she had a chance to respond, Inara whispered sharply to Thornton, Douse the light! Thornton did as he was told, looking around warily in the dark. Inara put her fingers to her lips to signal for silence and took the reins of the horses. She moved into the cover of the trees, urging Mira and Thornton to follow. What is it? Mira whispered. There, up ahead some distance. I see 3 figures, she answered, pointing in the direction they had been traveling. Thornton and Mira were crouched low among the trees, mostly obscured by the foliage, but there was not much they could do about the horses. Inara looked up at them in concern, then climbed deftly up into the branches of the tree over their heads. Can't believe he just sent us out for more Thrani, like they would just fall into our laps. What are we supposed to do now? The voice was high-pitched, but belonging to a man. A second voice that followed sounded nasal. My head still hurts. That big one got me good. Stop your whining, you two, came a third voice, low and rough. I should have just left you in that cage. Decane probably thinks we're good at this, and besides, he said, taking out an object from a pocket in his shirt, the Gwarai horn should lead us to the next one. Audible gasps and mutterings of wonder followed as the two other men admired the white curved bone he held aloft. Well, when I see him again, I'm asking he double our pay, said the one with the nasal voice. They made off with all my coins. You'd do that, Bunch. Just make sure I'm nowhere near you when you ask, the man with the low voice said, laughing. The 3 of them were coming down the trail that Thornton had been following and were headed right for them. Mira held her breath as the distance between them closed. Thornton put his hand on Jericho's nose and touched it reassuringly. If I never see that kith again, it will be too soon, said the one with the high-pitched voice. What's the matter, Twig? Came the low voice. Its owner was close enough to Mira that she could have touched him. Afraid of a little coin? He slapped the first man on the back and belted out a laugh that quickly tapered off as he came to a halt. What's wrong, Rimble? Twig asked. The horn. There was a glow from the bone, and he looked around as if searching for something. His eyes came to rest on the bushes where Mira and Thornton were concealed. He lowered the horn and said calmly, Boys, I think we've got company. Mira gasped as she was lifted roughly by the throat. Her feet dangled as she left the ground, kicking desperately for something solid beneath her. Let me go, She choked, doing her best to break free.
Maybe we're good at this after all,
Rimble said over her sounds of choking. The glow from the horn continued to grow in intensity, and as he held it up with his free hand, it engulfed him. Thornton jumped to his feet, drawing the attention of the two smaller men. Each of them produced a wooden club, twirling them around in their hands and beginning to circle him in the moonlight. One man with bandages over one eye took his right side, the other his left. A flash of familiarity came over Mira.
I know these men. They were the ones who attacked us in Lusk.
Thornton had his hammer out and gripped it in a wide defensive posture, ready to turn away the blows that were inevitably coming. He backed up, but the two men were on him in an instant. One came low and the other came high, and he chose to block high, taking a crippling blow to his thigh and crying out in pain. He dropped to his knees. Taking another blow to the back that knocked the wind out of him, he swung his hammer out in front of him in a desperate attempt to sweep the legs of the man coming at him. It worked, and Mira heard a snap followed by a scream as it broke bone. Thornton didn't have time to revel in the victory as he caught a club on the back of the head and dropped to the ground, unconscious. Two arrows flew from the treetops where Inara was hidden, aimed at the big man holding Mira. They flew true, one hitting him in the chest and the other catching him in the throat. But instead of dropping to the ground like anyone with such a wound would do, he looked calmly into the trees and said,
"You'll regret that,"
his eyes glowing white hot. Rimble gripped the horn tightly and threw Mira to the ground. The arrows that had buried themselves in him shuddered, then seemed to dissolve into thin air. Raising his hand to the sky, there was a loud crack from the horn in his fist that rushed outward, sending everyone else flying backward like straw in a windstorm. Inara hit the ground hard at his feet as she fell from the branches above.
"An Athrani and a Kinari all in one day?"
Rimble laughed.
"This is too good to be true."
Putting his boot on Inara's back, he said to his companion,
"Twig, tie them up."
Kneeling down, he grabbed Inara by the back of the neck and raised her face to his. Then, through a mouth full of rotten teeth, said,
"Let's show our guests some hospitality."
The last thing Mira saw was a thick, scarred hand coming right at her face. So that was chapter 12, and we see that Thornton and Mira, well, at least Mira recognizes that these are the guys that jumped them in Lusk. So one thing that, I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but I tried to parallel the wounds that Rimble was suffering with the wounds that Adrian was also suffering. As Dylas was trying to heal him and, it's not working. Rimble catches an arrow to the throat and then to the chest, which is obviously exactly where Adrian starts to bleed from. So, that was a reference to how his power was drained into that particular Gorai horn, and the two were, sort of linked together. So, thanks for joining us for chapter 12, and stay tuned for chapter 13. Next time on Readings from Gift of the Shaper.